You don't need that whole room to yourself, my mother-in-law said over Sunday dinner, passing the bread basket like she hadn't just casually proposed dismantling the one thing I'd built entirely on my own. Theo needs somewhere to work when he moves back, just temporarily. I smiled. I said, let me think about it. I already knew what I was going to do. But let me back up, because the story doesn't start at that dinner table. It starts about 3 years earlier when my husband and I moved into his parents' house just for a few months while we saved for a down payment. That was the plan. The plan lasted exactly as long as plans do when you're convenient to keep around. My name is Vera. I'm 31 years old. I'm a UX consultant, which means I work remotely, which means I need a dedicated space to take client calls without a TV blaring Law and Order reruns in the background. When we first moved in, I was working from the bedroom, perched on the edge of the mattress, with a ring light duct taped to the headboard. It was humiliating in a quiet, slow burn way that I didn't fully acknowledge at the time. The house belonged to my in-laws, my mother-in-law, Sandra, and my father-in-law, Jean. Nice people on the surface. The kind of people who say, our home is your home, and mean it right up until the moment having you there becomes even slightly inconvenient. They had a detached bonus room above the garage. It had its own entrance, its own mini-split heating and cooling unit that barely worked, and a window that faced the backyard. It had been used as a storage room for roughly a decade. Christmas decorations, Jean's old golf clubs, boxes of stuff that probably hadn't been opened since the Clinton administration. I asked, 8 months into living there, if I could convert it into a home office. Sandra said she'd have to check with Jean. Jean said as long as we weren't bothering anyone, I took that as a yes and got to work. I paid for everything myself. I want to be clear about that because it matters later. I hired a contractor to fix the subfloor, which had soft spots in 2 corners. I had an electrician run a dedicated circuit so I could run dual monitors and recording equipment without tripping breakers. I installed proper insulation because the room got to 50 degrees in January. I put in drywall, painted it a warm gray I spent 2 weekends agonizing over, and built out a custom desk situation along the entire back wall. Shelving, cable management, a door with an actual lock because privacy is not a luxury when you're on calls with corporate clients 6 hours a day. Total cost $22,000 over 4 months. Every cent from my own accounts. My husband Connor helped me carry furniture up the stairs. That was the extent of the shared investment. When it was done, it was the best room in the house. Sandra actually said that. She stood in the doorway and said, "Oh Vera, this is just beautiful." She meant it as a compliment. I took it as one at the time. For about a year, everything was fine. The office was mine. I had a routine. I woke up early, made coffee, walked across the driveway, and disappeared into the room until noon. My client roster grew. I landed a contract with a firm in Chicago that paid more per month than my mother-in-law made in 3. I didn't say that out loud. I just kept paying my share of the household expenses, groceries, utilities, the internet upgrade I'd requested because the existing plan couldn't handle video calls without freezing, and I stayed quiet and grateful and relatively invisible, which seemed to be the optimal state for a daughter-in-law in that house. Then Connor's brother Theo lost his job. Theo was 26. He'd been living in Seattle doing something in tech sales that he described differently every time someone asked about it. He and his girlfriend had broken up. The lease on his apartment was ending. He needed, as Sandra put it at that Sunday dinner, a soft landing place. I understood that. I had sympathy for it even. Losing a job and a relationship in the same season is brutal. I've been there. What I didn't understand was why the soft landing place had to be my office. "It has a separate entrance," Sandra said, refilling her water glass. "He'd have his own space. He wouldn't be underfoot." "It's not a bedroom," I said. "There's no closet, no bathroom." "He can share the hall bath," Jean said. "It's only temporary, a few months tops." Temporary, that word again. The same word they'd used 3 years ago when Connor and I arrived with a moving truck and a plan that quietly dissolved the moment we got comfortable. I walk out of that room, I said. Full time. It's my office. You can work from the bedroom, Sandra said. Plenty of people do. Connor was quiet beside me. He'd gone very still in the particular way he went, still when he didn't want to get in the middle of something, which was his default setting for anything involving his family and me occupying the same conflict. The bedroom doesn't have the equipment set up, I said. The dedicated circuit, the acoustic panels. Vera. Jane's voice had that particular weight to it, the tone that meant the discussion was approaching its conclusion, whether I agreed or not. He's family. You can make it work for a few months. It's not like you own the space. There it was. It's not like you own the space. $22,000. 4 months of weekends and contractor schedules and electrical permits. The subfloor I'd had fixed because it was rotting, which by the way increased the structural integrity and therefore the value of their home. All of it sitting right there on the table, and he just dismissed it with 7 words. You're right, I said. Sandra looked up from her plate. Connor turned to look at me. I don't own the space, I said, so I'll figure something out. I didn't fight. I didn't cry. I picked up my fork and finished my dinner, and later that night, after Connor had fallen asleep, I lay in the dark and felt something calcify in my chest. Not anger, exactly, something colder, clearer. I started making calls the next morning. The furnished apartment was in a complex 20 minutes from the house. Modern building, secure parking, fast elevator. The unit was on the 9th floor and had a room designated as a den that was just large enough for my desk setup. It cost $2,800 a month, which was real money, but I'd done the math and I could absorb it, especially once I stopped contributing to a household that wasn't mine and never had been. I signed the lease on a Tuesday. I didn't tell Connor until Thursday, which I know sounds cold, but I needed the lease in my name before I had the conversation, because I knew how that conversation was going to go. It went exactly as I expected. You already signed it. He sat on the edge of the bed, holding the folder I'd handed him. We didn't talk about this. I tried to talk about it at dinner Sunday, I said. Your father told me I don't own the space. He didn't mean it like that. I know he didn't, I said, but it's still true. And since it's true, I'm going to go find a space I do own. Connor looked at the lease for a long time. So what does this mean for us? It means I'm moving into an apartment, I said. You can come with me or you can stay here. I'd like you to come with me. But I'm going. He stayed at the house for the first 2 weeks, which was a separate and longer story I won't get into here. The short version is that he came around. People usually do when the alternative is explaining to their mother why their wife left. The move itself took 1 weekend. I hired movers for the equipment, the monitors, the server, the acoustic panels. I uninstalled myself with a flathead screwdriver in a state of focused, meditative calm. I took everything I brought in and everything I'd bought. I left the walls painted grey because I'd used a low VOC paint that was genuinely better than what had been there. And I wasn't going to repaint out of spite. I'm not petty. I just have standards. I left the subfloor. I left the dedicated electrical circuit. I left the shelving I'd built into the wall, because removing it would have required patching drywall and I had a lease signing to get to. I left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "Room is cleared. Best of luck with the setup." I signed my name. I took my key off the ring and set it on top of the note. I drove away and did not look in the rearview mirror, which is something I'd always found annoying when characters do it in movies and which I now understand completely. The first week in the apartment was the kind of quiet I hadn't experienced in 3 years. No one knocked on my office door to ask if I'd seen the TV remote. No one started a load of laundry at 11 p.m., using the machine that shared a wall with the bonus room and sounded like a helicopter landing. I made coffee in my own kitchen, walked 12 steps to my desk, and logged into a client call without first checking to make sure the hallway outside was clear. I didn't know how tired I'd been until I stopped. I tracked the situation at the house through Connor, who was commuting back occasionally to collect his things, and, I suspected, to manage the fallout he hadn't fully anticipated. The first call came 8 days after I moved out. Sandra, I let it ring. She texted 20 minutes later, Vera, the internet is barely working. Theo says it keeps dropping. Is there a number we can call? I read it twice. Then I replied I upgraded the plan to a business tier when I moved in because I needed the bandwidth for work. It's in my name. I'm going to have to cancel it since I'm not there anymore. You'd want to set up a new account. The provider's number is on their website. She didn't reply for 2 hours. Then can you just transfer to Jean's name? I called and asked. They don't do transfers. They'd have to open a new account. It'll probably take a week or two to get set up. This was partially true. I didn't push very hard on the transfer question. Connor told me later that Theo had been set up in my old office within 4 days of my moving out. He'd bought a gaming chair and a ring light and was planning to do content creation in addition to his job search, which was a phrase that meant he was going to stream video games and call it a career pivot. He'd told Sandra the Wi-Fi was essential. Week 2, Jean called Connor to ask about the mini split. The heating unit was making a sound it apparently hadn't made before. I knew that sound. It meant the filter needed to be cleaned, which needed to happen every 4 to 6 weeks, which I had been doing quietly and without acknowledgement for 2 years. I texted Connor the filter location and a YouTube link. I did not offer to come over and do it. Week 3, Sandra texted me directly. Vera, the contractor, called. Said there's an outstanding balance on the electrical work from when you had the office done. $340. He has Jean's address but said the account was in your name. Can you handle that? I sat with that text for a long time. The work had been completed and fully paid 18 months ago. I had the receipts. There was no outstanding balance. What there was, I suspected, was a contractor who'd done some additional small job for Jean recently, probably related to the electrical panel now that they were running more equipment in the bonus room, and Sandra had connected the wrong dots. I replied, all work I contracted was paid in full. I can send you the receipts if you need them. Any recent electrical work would be a separate account in Jean's name. She replied, oh, he must have called someone else for a quote. Never mind. No apology, but I hadn't expected one. The actual crisis came about 6 weeks in, on the Thursday night in late November, when the temperature had dropped into the 20s for the first time that year. Connor called me from the driveway of the house at 9:15 p.m. I could tell from his voice that something had happened. The heat exchanger in the HVAC went out, he said. The whole system is down. The house HVAC, I asked. Yeah, it's 48 degrees inside. Mom's got space heaters going, but the one in the bonus room kept tripping the breaker. He paused. Theo doesn't know that the bonus room circuit is the one I put in for your equipment. He was running space heaters and a gaming PC and monitors off of it. I closed my eyes. The breaker held, Connor said quickly. Nothing caught fire. But the HVAC company can't come until tomorrow afternoon and it's supposed to get to 18 tonight. There was a silence. Connor, I said carefully, what are you asking me? Mom wants to know if you know anyone who does emergency HVAC. I do, I said. I used a company called Whitfield Climate when I was getting quotes for the bonus room. They do emergency calls. I'll text you the number. Could you? I mean, you have a relationship with them. Could you call? I looked out my window at the lights of the city. 9 floors up, the world looked very manageable from here. I can text you the number and the contact name, I said. Tell them Connor referred you and they'll probably prioritize it. But it needs to be in Jean's name. I'm not on that property anymore. I sent the text. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb. I made tea and read for an hour before I fell asleep, and I slept better than I had in years. The HVAC company came the next morning. The repair cost Jean $1,100 for emergency service and parts. Connor told me this with the specific tone of someone delivering information they're not sure how to frame. I said that sounded about right for an emergency call in November. He agreed that it did. 3 weeks later, Sandra called Connor and asked him to ask me if I'd consider coming back. Not coming to visit. Coming back, permanently. Bringing my equipment. Resuming the previous arrangement. The offer, as Connor relayed it, was that they would, quote, work something out about the bonus room, possibly ask Theo to use the basement instead once it was finished, which it currently wasn't, and the timeline on that was unclear. They missed having me around. The house felt different. Things weren't running as smoothly. I listened to all of this while standing at my kitchen counter eating a bowl of cereal at 7:30 in the morning, which is my version of meditation. "What do you want to do?" Connor asked. "I want to know what work something out means," I said. He didn't have a specific answer for that. "Then I'm staying here," I said. Connor moved in the following weekend. He brought his clothes in 2 trips and his guitar in a case that barely fit in the elevator and a box of books he'd been storing at his parents' house since college. We rearranged the den so his desk fit in the corner. It was tight. It worked. Sandra asked if we'd come for Christmas. We said yes to Christmas Eve dinner and left by 9. It was fine. Jean looked older. Theo was there with a new girlfriend who seemed very nice and very unaware of the previous 4 months of chaos. The bonus room, I heard from Connor later, still had the grey walls and the built-in shelving. Theo had put up some LED strip lights and a poster. The dedicated circuit was still being used to power more equipment than it was rated for, but that was no longer my problem. In January, I filed with the county to recover the cost of the electrical permit I'd pulled. It was in my name, and since the improvement now benefited the property without any compensation to me, I had a civil small claims case. It wasn't a lot of money. It wasn't about the money. My attorney, who is a friend from college and who billed me for exactly 1 hour of her time to write a letter, told me I had a reasonable case for the full permit cost plus the contractor labor on the electrical work, since those were documentable improvements to a property I didn't own. Jean called me after he received the letter. It was the first time he called me directly in 6 months. "Vera," he said, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "I don't think so," I said. "I have the receipts and the permit number. The electrical work is a permanent improvement to your property. I paid for it. That seems pretty clear." There was a long pause. "Family doesn't sue family," he said. "I'm not suing anyone," I said. "My attorney sent a letter. If you'd like to settle it without going to small claims, you can send me a check for the permit and labor costs, which is $4,400. I'll send you the itemized breakdown." Another pause. "We don't have that liquid right now." "That's fine," I said. "The letter has a response window. You have 30 days. I wasn't trying to blow up my marriage or burn down a relationship I'd need for the next several decades of holidays and eventual grandchildren. I want to be honest about my motivations because I think people sometimes frame these stories as pure righteous revenge, and that's not quite right. I was tired. I had spent 3 years making myself useful and invisible in a house that wasn't mine. And the moment I built something of my own within it, the assumption was that it was available to be reassigned. I needed them to understand, in concrete and documented terms, that there are consequences to that assumption. Not as punishment, as education. Jean sent a check for $2,200 3 weeks later, with a note that said it was in the spirit of keeping things civil, and that he hoped we could put the matter behind us. I cashed it and put it toward my April rent. I sent a handwritten thank you note because I was raised right. We had dinner with them in March, Connor and me and his parents, at a restaurant halfway between our apartment and the house. Sandra ordered the salmon. Jean talked about a trip they were planning to Sedona. Theo had gotten a job offer in Austin and was probably moving in the summer. The bonus room, Sandra mentioned, might become a proper guest room, now that there was some breathing room to think about renovations. She asked if I had any suggestions for the renovation. I told her I'd be happy to share the contractor's contact information. I said it warmly. I meant it that way. The file in my phone still had his number, right there between my dentist and my dry cleaner, from the last time I'd used him to build something worth building. Some people ask me if I regret how it played out. if I could have handled it differently, if moving out was extreme. I don't think it was extreme. I think it was the only honest response to a situation where the people who were supposed to respect my contribution had quietly decided that what I built was theirs to use as they saw fit. You can argue with that. You can ask someone to see your perspective, to value your labor, to acknowledge what you've put in. You can have that conversation once, twice, carefully, and without accusation. But at some point, arguing is just noise, and I've never been particularly interested in making noise. The apartment lease is up in July. Connor and I are buying a house. It has a dedicated office space on the second floor with good light and a door that locks, and this time the deed will have both our names on it. I already know which wall I'm putting the desk against. I still think about that Sunday dinner sometimes, the bread basket going around the table. Sandra's voice so calm and reasonable, like she was suggesting we rearrange the furniture rather than hand over a room I'd spent $22,000 and 4 months of my life building. And me, sitting there, smiling, saying, "Let me think about it." What I've come to understand is that the way a situation ends is almost always a direct result of how it was allowed to begin. I moved into that house believing that contributing fully, paying my share, improving the property, making myself useful would be recognized. That's not naive. That's a reasonable expectation between people who respect each other. But respect has to be practiced, not just assumed. And when Gene said it's not like you own the space, he wasn't being cruel. He was being honest about how he'd always seen the arrangement. I just hadn't been paying attention to what he was actually showing me. That's the part that took me a while to sit with, not the anger. The anger was easy and clean, but the recognition that I had let it go on. I had paid bills without asking for acknowledgement. I had fixed problems without being asked. I had made myself so reliably useful that my presence stopped registering as something that could be withdrawn. I had, without fully meaning to, trained them to take me for granted. And the moment I stopped, the whole system revealed exactly how fragile it had always been. What Vera did, what I did, wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that, even now. Filing that small claims letter wasn't about punishing Jean. It was about establishing, in terms that couldn't be softened or reframed over a dinner table, that my labor had a value and that value had consequences. $2,200 is not nothing. But more than the money, it was the act of standing in my own accounting of things and refusing to let it be rewritten. There's something people don't tell you about being the capable one in a family, the one who manages and fixes and quietly absorbs, which is that your capability becomes the ceiling for what anyone around you will ever develop. When I stopped handling the internet account, they had to call the provider. When I stopped knowing the HVAC company, they had to find one. They figured it out. Slowly, expensively, with some chaos along the way. But they figured it out. Because they were always capable of it. They just hadn't needed to be. I think about what it actually takes to do what I did. Not the logistics, the lease signing and the movers and the contractor receipts, but the internal part. You have to know your own worth clearly enough that someone else's dismissal of it doesn't revise your estimate. You have to be willing to absorb short-term discomfort, the silence, the guilt, the second guessing at 2 in the morning because you understand that the longer-term cost of staying is higher. And you have to act, not argue, not explain, not wait to be understood. Just act methodically on your own behalf. Connor and I are buying a house in July. The deed has both our names on it. That detail is not small to me. I don't regret any of it. I regret that it was necessary. Those are different things, and I think it matters to know the difference.